The Age of War Chapter 3 is right around the corner, and guess who forgot all about reviewing the Age of War Chapter 2? Yeah, me. Well, no time to waste, lads. Let's get right into it and see how the Age of War Chapter 2 shaped up for Conan Exiles. This update came with two major features, the Purge Revamp and the Loot Revamp, alongside some smaller miscellaneous changes. So, let's firstly jump into the Purge Revamp. This was probably the biggest feature of almost the entire age. The original Purge had long been a point of contention and frustration, and whilst many had learned to put up with and even enjoy the old Purge, others expressed frustration of how buggy, inconsistent, and sometimes just frankly not fun the system was. So this update aimed to revamp the Purge and make it a lot more engaging and rewarding. To achieve that, the Purge is now an entirely opt-in system, with the Stygian army taking the place of localised fighting forces. They're here for the treasure hoards introduced in the Age of War Chapter 1 and will attempt to break into your base, steal your treasure and get away. Now I've got to admit, I'm a sucker for a siege mechanic, so this immediately seemed a lot more interesting to me than the previous Purge system. By being opt-in, the Purge can be called in basically whenever you want, and the difficulty scales with how much treasure you have, so the system has a lot of player-driven control. As much as I did enjoy this new feature, it wasn't without its issues. The major problem was of course Purge pathing to the treasure coffer, which many people struggled with. The devs did say this was actively being worked on to loosen up the issues, and I'm not entirely sure if that issue was reduced by dev action, or if people just worked out more consistent ways to get purges, but overall I did see less complaints of it as the chapter continued. There was also a bug where the Hand of War just wouldn't appear, though fortunately that seems to have been a minority of cases. I think the major issue that I and many others had with the Purge was that there really wasn't a good enough incentive to do them outside of just doing it for fun or for some of the new recipes, which were pretty easy to attain. The Age of War Chapter 3 and presumably future chapters will add more content to the reward table of the Purge, so that is being rectified, but there wasn't a whole load of reasons to continue on with the Purge after you'd experienced it a few times in Chapter 2. Despite that, for its faults, I really enjoyed the new Purge. I know some people don't enjoy it as much, and it's not as lore or immersion friendly seeing as we have to manually call the Purge, but I do think that is a somewhat healthy compromise. Overall, I think it was a net positive change that makes a core system like the Purge much more enjoyable, at least for me. The second major feature was the Loot Revamp, another much needed change. Prior to this update, loot from many sources was pretty uninspiring and didn't really reward exploring, fighting, etc. outside of your immediate area, and only when necessary. The Loot Revamp aimed to remove all the boring stuff from the reward pool, making looting both more attractive and more lucrative. Alongside improving the loot pool, this revamp introduced new interactables to camps, localised loot, even better loot inside dungeons, enemies sometimes dropping items they're carrying, and the moving of all legendary chests to the dungeons themselves. Dungeons also got extra content, be that new areas, traps or additional bosses, and the Library of Esoteric Knowledge and the Void Forge had their randomness removed, now giving their recipes in a set order. Even for someone that, admittedly, has not played as much PvE as I should have, this change is immediately tangible. Loot feels valuable and worthwhile, the dungeon changes were pretty interesting and seemed generally well received, and I think the relocation of legendary chests into those dungeons was actually a really good idea. It gives more reason to go back into dungeons you've already cleared, and encourages movement across the map, from world bosses that drop skeleton keys over to the dungeons. The devs have said before that once players make a base they don't tend to explore the map much, and previous changes like treasure and teleporters have aimed to, well, change that. I think the legendary chest change plays very well into that idea, and I think it makes a lot of sense. The only issue I really remember with this was the dreaded shield frames. Initially it seemed like almost every single box you opened had at least one shield frame in it, though that was changed fairly quickly if I remember properly, and the spawn frequency was very harshly nerfed. Overall, I think the Loot Revamp was a very good change and one that was needed. As for some of the smaller changes, there was a fair amount of bug squashing alongside some combat changes. The biggest was a general reduction in hyper armor and the addition of attack rotation. I think the reduction in hyper armor was decent, we're not game changing exactly, but an alright balancing step from a PvE perspective, though I know PvP players probably think very differently about some of the combat stuff. Full transparency, I have never, and probably will never play Conan PvP, so I can't claim to be able to put across a thorough rebuttal or endorsement on those fronts. That's also why I won't really be touching on the trebuchet, avatar or god bubble changes that came this chapter, as frankly, I can't really give the PvP perspective on what is almost objectively a PvP-centric change. Attack rotation seems like a really small thing, but I've noticed that it actually plays into combat a lot. Fighting now feels a lot smoother and more enjoyable, especially with weapons that really reward accuracy like short swords or spears, so overall for some of the more PvE focused combat changes, pretty good. On the microtransaction front, let's first tackle the Battle Pass. There were definitely some nice things in this edition of the pass, but also a few duds. It wasn't the best, nor was it the worst. I said at the time that I thought it was fairly decent from the first time buyer perspective, and I still think the same now. Not bad at all, but not outstanding. The Bazaar had some very interesting stuff this time around. The two building sets were the Stygian Pyramid bundle and the War-Torn Ruins. Stygian Pyramid was pretty good, I was very happy with it. There were one or two pieces that I thought were sorely missed, and I know Wedge Enjoyers missed out yet again, but overall, I think it was quite good. The War-Torn Ruins kinda missed the mark for me, and I think for many others. It's an incredibly niche set that did release with some issues around the smoking rubble placeables which have left a bit of a sour taste. I like the idea of more niche stuff, but I think this might have been too niche to really have any practical appeal outside of roleplay, and even then it represents a very small minority of roleplayers. There were some other nice bundles this time around. The standouts for me were the Numidian Civilian Clothing bundle, that was definitely targeted at roleplayers but nails the more simple and traditional clothing aesthetic. The Numidian Library bundle was also really nice, and it's great to finally have bookshelves that aren't hidden doors. However, as with most stuff on the Bazaar outside of the building sets, pricing on a lot of these bundles was still pretty high, and slow rotation times are kind of bogging down the Bazaar a bit. I still would really like to see a separate menu for seasonal stock, more rotation slots, or faster rotation times to cycle through the ever-growing list of content, or failing that, a new menu that just allows you at any time to buy any of the building sets I think would be a really good addition, as a lot of the people that I see mention how they're waiting for something to come back is often in regards to the more popular building sets. So, all things considered, how did the Age of War Chapter 2 shape up? So far my highest rating for a chapter was an 8 out of 10 for the Age of Sorcery Chapter 3. For those that aren't aware and the new viewers, my scale kind of starts at 5 and then I take away or give points for bad and good features respectively. This has been a tough one to rate, but I think the Age of War Chapter 2 gets a 7.5 out of 10. Had the Purge Revamp been a bit cleaner, with more incentive to engage with the system, and of course without the pathing issues, and if the War-Torn Ruins as a flagship Bazaar edition had been a bit less niche and didn't have the bug with the rubble piles, I think this update could have rivaled Age of Sorcery Chapter 3. Despite those issues though, I think this update has very good bones, and whilst some things like the loot revamp might not have been the most exciting addition, I think it has proved very valuable. The Age of War Chapter 3 is shaping up to be very good, at least from what we've seen so far, and I think if it all goes smoothly, that update might just overtake AOS Chapter 3 for my highest rated chapter yet. As it is though, the Age of War Chapter 2 was a solid update, unfortunately marred by a few issues. And there we have it, my review of the Age of War Chapter 2. Thank you for watching, and of course a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. I'm not sure how I almost forgot to do this video, but lads, we got there in the end, and make sure you subscribe for all the coverage of the Age of War Chapter 3. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.